Good morning. Usually I like to start any kind of talk with a joke or a humorous story. It's a good icebreaker, a nice way to help you pay attention, at least for a minute or two. But not today. I'm in no mood. I'm a white heterosexual male, and I'm angry. Now let me state the obvious here. For all the anger I may feel as a straight white man, I don't understand. I can't possibly understand. I don't understand what it's like to be gay and afraid to show the world who I love for fear of being mocked, fired from my job, beaten, or worse. I can't possibly understand what it's like to be black or brown and in constant fear of being disrespected, assaulted, or shot at. I don't understand what it's like to be a woman being judged by her appearance, leered at, grabbed, propositioned, verbally and physically assaulted, or worse. I can't put myself in your shoes. All I can do is say, I hear you, I see you, I honor you, I respect you, and I love you. But let me explain why I'm so angry. In the immortal words of Betty Davis in All About Eve, fasten your seatbelts. It's gonna be a bumpy night. If I had more of a cold, maybe I could have done that a little better. But I'm angry because some white men are pretty horrible people, and it's giving all of us a bad name. Wherever you get your news, you can't help but get the impression that white men are pigs. Who grabs women by their private parts, brags about it, then tries to minimize it, saying it's just standard locker room talk. White men. Who puts on clerical robes, abuses children, and then helps cover it up for decades. White men. Who makes sex the price of getting a part in a movie, or getting a job, or being a White House intern. White men. Who closes polling places in black and Latino neighborhoods, who denies Native Americans their right to vote, who tears apart brown families at the border and throws children in cages. White men. Someone shoots up an Amish schoolhouse or a black church or a synagogue. You can bet it's a white man. Who doesn't want poor people to have medical care, who goes to court to keep their businesses from having to pay for birth control, who spends billions of dollars to buy our government and then uses all that power to enrich themselves. White men. Homophobes, misogynists, sexual predators, bigots, racists, anti-Semites, white men. I'm beyond angry. I'm livid. I'm tempted to say, I want my country back. But you know what? This is the country we've always had. America was founded by white men who treated people of color as property to be bought and sold and abused, and looked on women as appendages. For all those TV commentators and holier-than-thou politicians who wring their hands and say, this isn't the America I know, this isn't the America I grew up in, I want to know where they grew up. For my work, I spend some time with data from the U.S. Census. So I took a look. In 1790, the country conducted its first census. There were 800,000 free white men, yes, that's the term that was used, and 700,000 enslaved people, almost one enslaved person for every adult white man in the country. 10 years later, the population had increased by about a third. The number of free white men was up to 1.1 million, and the number of enslaved people was at about 900,000. Again, about one enslaved person for every adult white man. In 1800, in Eastern Virginia, the ratio was almost 4 to 1. 86,000 white men, 322,000 enslaved people. That's America. We like to say we were founded on principles of freedom and justice. But the truth is we were founded by white men who made the rules, decimated the native population, stole their land and their dignity, destroyed the natural beauty they worshiped, and then they created an economy built on the sweat and blood of enslaved black people. But oh, the talking heads say, that's not the America I grew up in. Really? My grandparents faced religious intolerance and discrimination from the minute they set foot in this country as children or teenagers in the early 1900s. They watched this country turn away ships filled with Jews and other undesirables, sending them back to Europe to be slaughtered. They endured a country that worshiped heroes like Charles Lindbergh and great leaders like Henry Ford, who were unabashed and unapologetic racists and anti-Semites, who supported Hitler's final solution. That's the America my grandparents grew up in. My grandfather refused to let my mother finish college. Her role was to get married and have babies. She didn't need an education. Forget the fact that she was the valedictorian of her high school, more than 1,000 students, and that a college education was free in New York City. She was a woman and didn't need an education or a career. That's the America my parents grew up in. I was 10 years old when Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated as they sought freedom, justice, and equality for people of color. It seemed like every night the news was filled with white men beating people who were peacefully seeking the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That's the same year George Wallace ran for president on a platform of white supremacy, hatred, and bigotry. He received 1 out of every 8 votes cast in the 1968 presidential election, winning 45 electoral votes. 1 out of every 8 votes cast. I grew up in a country filled with fear, distrust, anger, and hatred for anyone different. When I was 20 and looking for a small apartment in Northern Virginia, a rental agent explained which buildings had security problems and should be avoided. After we looked around a little more, it quickly became clear that security problems had nothing to do with safety. It was a code word for places that rented to people of color. It was 1978. That's the America I grew up in. So you might understand why I'm angry at the people who want to keep us there, and why I get so mad at the "that's not the America I grew up in" politicians and so-called experts. White men firing into crowds, using water cannons, beating people not like them, spewing hateful rhetoric, treating women like dirt, stringing up black people, and blaming the Jews for all the problems of the world. That's the America my grandparents knew. It's the America my parents knew. And it's the America I grew up in, too. So stop telling me this is new. What's new is that it's rearing its ugly head again, after staying slightly underground for a few years. Really just a few inches underground when you think about some of the horrible things said about President Obama by white men. I'm angry at this country, and in particular, I'm angry at white men who refuse to grow up and move us forward. It's hard for me to watch the news or even think about politics anymore because I just get angry. So what do I do with this anger? First, I take solace in the fact that some incredible human beings have been angry too. That's why I chose those brief readings from the Old and New Testaments this morning. Moses got so mad at the Israelites, he smashed the original tablets given to him by God. Now, for any millennials here today, let me pause and explain. When I say tablets, I'm not sure I'm going to finish that one, but we're talking about the stone tablets that were carved with the commandments from God. And Jesus, peaceful, loving Jesus, had some anger issues too. He's hungry. He wants some figs. So he finds a fig tree, and there's no fruit on it. He gets so angry, he kills the tree. One of God's life-giving creations. What did that poor tree ever do to him? So at least I'm not alone. If Jesus and Moses can get angry, then it's probably okay for me too. But I ask myself, is it enough to be angry? So I kept looking for answers. Now, you may think you have issues with your family tree. Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. Okay, how would that be for some pressure growing up? His name is Arun Gandhi, and he had some anger issues growing up in South Africa. He was the victim of prejudice, and he wanted to lash out. One day after he'd been tripped and taunted by white boys while playing soccer, he had a chat with his grandfather. Arun relates the story in his book, The Gift of Anger. And after Arun apologized to his grandfather for getting angry, he remembers the conversation like this. I am glad to see you can be moved to anger. Anger is good. I get angry all the time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I have never seen you angry, grandfather, because I have learned to use my anger for good. Anger to people is like gas to the automobile. It fuels you to move forward and get to a better place. Without it, we would not be motivated to rise to a challenge. It is an energy that compels us to define what is just and unjust. That's worth repeating. Anger fuels us to move forward and compels us to define justice. Martin Luther King Jr. also shared some words and some wisdom about anger. Just 2 months before he was killed, Dr. King gave an address in Carnegie Hall to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the birth of W.E.B. Du Bois. See, it's all coming together. The speech is a beautiful tribute to Dr. Du Bois, who, as we learned, was a brilliant scholar and courageous leader. Near the end of the speech, Dr. King explains what Dr. Du Bois learned from the study of history and sociology. Dr. King said, history had taught him it is not enough for people to be angry. The supreme task is to organize and unite people so that their anger becomes a transforming force. Anger becomes a transforming force. I don't know about you, but for me, when Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King agree, it's time to pay attention. So let me be so bold as to try to put their wisdom into one sentence. Anger is a transforming force that compels us to move forward and define justice. So we first need to ask ourselves, what is justice? I suggest 3 simple words as a place to start: fairness, dignity, and respect. Without those, we cannot have justice. You may remember several months ago, Sarah led a service about the hymn we sing each Sunday, Spirit of Life. Each week we sing the phrase, giving life the shape of justice. I've been thinking about that phrase for over a year now. What does it mean to give life the shape of justice? And what does the shape of justice look like? And more important, given where our country is right now, how can we transform our anger to positive action? How can it move us forward and give our lives the shape of justice? 20 or 30 years ago, I probably would have said that the path toward justice is shaped in our government. Legislatures and courts, lawyers doing battle, people drafting legislation and lobbying their leaders, and voting. If you want to give life the shape of justice, become a lawyer and work to change the law. But I'm older and wiser and angrier now. I have seen government continue to fail us year after year, regardless of the party label worn by those in power. To be sure, some years are better than others, and few years have seen a worse federal government than this one. But after 40 years of working in and around government, I am convinced that government is not the way to channel my anger to give life the shape of justice. Government is a way for people to act collectively. And right now it's acting collectively, you try saying that, in a way I find abhorrent. But government is not the only way we act collectively. We work together through our places of worship. We work together through charities. We work together in our schools and workplaces. We form networks of people to solve problems. And none of that requires a government official to sit down at the table with you. Here's an example. One of the ways white men, what am I supposed to say, Lenore? Bless their hearts? Yeah. So one of the ways white men have decided to keep poor people down is to make it really tough for poor women to cope with their period each month. There is no government benefit that lets you buy tampons or pads. Many states, fortunately not this one, even charge sales tax on period products, the most regressive form of taxation that hits the poor the hardest. Don't even get me started about how we treat women in our prisons or how many days of school are missed by girls who can't afford period products. 2 years ago, the Los Angeles Times reported, feminine hygiene products are among the most requested items at food pantries and homeless shelters, but organizations rarely have enough pads, tampons, and liners to meet the needs of their clients. Or this one from Tucson. One woman's daughters started menstruating at ages 9 and 11, and buying sanitary products for 3 was more than they could afford. There's no private or public subsidy for these products, and they're expensive. Or this report from Winnipeg. At about $5, a small pack of feminine hygiene products could buy a meal or 2 for a struggling family. So food on the table or tampons in the purse. For many women living in poverty, it's no choice at all. Ask anyone working in a food pantry, homeless shelter, or women's shelter, and they'll tell you that tampons and pads are one of the most requested items that they often don't have available. Just last month, we heard the story of an 18-year-old girl visiting a food pantry and leaving with adult diapers for her period, as it was the closest thing to period products they had. And that was right here in Danville. A few years ago, Chris and Dawn started our Love Period project as a wedding present to themselves. The project supplied a few local food pantries and shelters with period products and did a lot of the legwork. We raised some money. Eventually, we realized it wasn't practical to drive pads and tampons all over the valley. Did you know we serve an area of more than 1,000 square miles? We never calculated the MPT, it's miles per tampon, you'll get there, but it would have been a big number. So we kicked around some ideas, and then Reagan came along, who just happens to be a logistics professional. And we had lunch with Cliff, who helps launch new businesses. You never know what resources you have. The pieces were coming together. So last spring, we got this crazy idea. We were going to take our little love period project, spin it off into a separate charity, and grow it. We applied for a grant from the UU Women's Federation. Did you know there's a UU Women's Federation? They gave us $5,000, and we now have a charity called Shape of Justice. Remember our 3 words that help define justice: fairness, dignity, and respect. What says that better than a tampon or pad when you need it? So maybe justice does have a shape after all, and it's shaped like a tampon. Who knew? Last January, before we started thinking about truly giving life the shape of justice, we provided about 600 tampons, pads, or liners to a few food pantries or shelters, and that made a difference for dozens of women. This summer, we formed Shape of Justice as a nonprofit, tax-exempt charity, and we've started expanding. During September and October combined, we shipped more than 10,000 tampons, pads, or liners to food pantries and shelters in 6 counties. And yes, we're now serving that food pantry in Danville, so young women don't need to wear adult diapers to manage their periods. But we're just getting started. Tomorrow, a large service organization in Bloomsburg will receive more than 8,000 tampons, pads, and liners from Shape of Justice. That cost us about $800, and it will let them serve hundreds of women throughout Columbia and Montour counties. We're about to launch the next phase, raising money, applying for more grants, expanding into other communities, both in Pennsylvania and we hope in other parts of the country as well. I won't make the complete pitch now, but we need money and ideas. If you want to donate or learn how you can help, our website is listed on the bulletin today. Or you can see me after the service. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm still an angry white man, but I'm trying to use that anger as a transforming force to find the shape of justice. You could say I'm channeling my anger into tampons and pads. Thousands of them each month. By this time next year, maybe we'll be talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of them. Anger is a transforming force that compels us to move forward and define justice. Anger need not lead us to lash out in violence or to retaliate. When they sow hatred, we harvest love. When they use their energy to lash out in anger, we convert that energy into love to propel us toward a more just world. When they sling mud, we collect it and mold it into the shape of justice. Look in your communities, listen to your neighbors, find ways to bring fairness, dignity, and respect to those who are being ignored or abused. Use your anger to give your life the shape of justice. Who would have thought some angry old white guy would have found the shape of justice in a tampon? How will you give your life the shape of justice?